Right now, inside your skull, around 86 billion neurons are trading tiny electrical signals. Every thought you have ever had lives inside that quiet storm. But one day, that storm will stop. The real question is, what happens in the seconds right before it does? For most of history, we assumed the brain simply switched off, like a lamp losing power. The truth turns out to be far stranger. In its final moments, your brain may do something extraordinary. A last burst of activity that science is only beginning to understand. People who came back describe tunnels, blinding light, their whole life replayed in an instant. Were they only dreaming, or was their dying brain showing them something real? Tonight, we follow the signal all the way to the edge, and we ask what your brain actually does in the moments right before you die. Your brain is only about 2% of your body weight, yet it demands roughly 20% of your oxygen every second you are alive. It has almost no way to store fuel. It lives hand to mouth, fed by a constant river of oxygen-rich blood. So the story of dying begins with one simple event. The river stops. When the heart stops beating, blood pressure collapses within seconds. The pump that pushed oxygen up to your neurons goes silent, and your brain notices almost immediately. Within about 10 seconds, the cortex, the thinking, wakeful surface of your brain, goes dark. This is why a person whose heart suddenly stops loses consciousness so fast. They do not feel themselves fading for minutes. The lights go out in moments. Fighter pilots who pull too many G-forces know this edge well. When blood drains from the head, their vision narrows, then vanishes, and they black out without warning. But here is the key. Your neurons are not dead yet. They are starving, but still intact, still holding their charge like tiny batteries. For a brief window, they have just enough stored energy left to keep firing. And this is the first surprise of dying. Going dark is not the same as going quiet. As the oxygen vanishes, the brain does not simply slide down to nothing. Something else begins. A strange, desperate flare of activity that should be impossible in a dying organ. To understand it, we have to look at what scientists saw when they watched the exact instant the brain lost its air. In 2013, neuroscientists at the University of Michigan ran an experiment that unsettled almost everyone who read it. They recorded the brain activity of rats at the precise moment their hearts stopped. They expected a gentle fade into silence. Instead, for about 30 seconds after the heart stopped, the brain lit up. Not weakly, fiercely. They saw a surge of high-frequency gamma waves. The same rhythm linked to sharp focus and conscious awareness. By some measures, the dying brain briefly looked more active than a normal waking one. For years, people wondered if this was just a quirk of rodents. Then, in 2022, doctors captured something similar in a human, almost by accident. An 87-year-old patient was being monitored for seizures when his heart suddenly stopped. The machine kept recording right through it, and in the seconds around his death, they saw the same gamma surge, the brain rhythm tied to memory and dreaming flickering one last time. So why would a starving brain spend its final energy on a burst of activity? One idea is that this is an emergency response. Starved of oxygen, Neurons dump their stored chemicals all at once and fire in a synchronized wave. Another idea is more haunting. That gamma rhythm is exactly what we would expect if the brain were generating a vivid, conscious experience. In other words, the surge may not be meaningless noise. It may be the neural signature of something actually being felt. If that is true, the dying brain is not just shutting down. It may be running one final intense program. And the people who live through it tend to describe the same thing first: a tunnel and a light. Almost every culture on Earth tells the same story about dying: a dark tunnel, a growing light at the end of it. People who survive cardiac arrest report it again and again, across countries, languages, and beliefs. It is one of the most consistent features of a near-death experience. So, is the brain simply inventing this? Or is there a physical reason? The leading explanation starts in your eyes. The retina, at the back of your eye, is nervous tissue, just as hungry for oxygen as your brain. And its center, the part that gives you sharp, detailed vision, is especially fragile. When blood flow drops, the edges of your sight fail first. The world closes in from the sides, leaving a shrinking circle of vision in the middle. That shrinking circle is the tunnel. Pilots in centrifuge training describe the exact same thing in the seconds before they black out. Vision narrowing to a single bright point. Then there is the light itself. As the visual cortex, the seeing part of your brain, loses oxygen, its neurons begin to fire chaotically. With no real image coming in, the brain fills the dark with its own signals. And bright, formless light is one of the simplest things it can produce. So the tunnel and the light may not be a doorway to anywhere at all. They may be the honest report of an eye and a brain running out of fuel, narrating their own shutdown. But that does not explain the next thing people describe, something far harder to wave away. Because many survivors say that as the light grew brighter, their entire life began to play back, all at once. My whole life flashed before my eyes. We say it as a tired figure of speech. But survivors of near-death events describe it as something startlingly real. Not a tidy slideshow, but a flood. Scenes from childhood. Faces long forgotten. Moments they had not thought about in decades. All returning at once. Where would such a thing come from? Deep inside your brain sit two structures that matter here. The hippocampus, which files away your memories, and the regions beside it that stamp those memories with emotion. Both are extremely sensitive to a loss of oxygen, among the very first areas to react when fuel runs low. One theory is that as these memory centers destabilize, they fire in a chaotic cascade. Stored memories are released not one by one, but in a rush, like a filing cabinet tipping over and spilling its drawers across the floor. That 2022 human recording adds weight to this idea. The gamma waves seen at death are the very rhythm the brain uses during memory recall and dreaming. So, in those final seconds, the brain may genuinely be replaying itself, pulling up a lifetime of experience in one last sweep. Researchers like Sam Parnia, who has studied thousands of cardiac arrest cases, find these reports oddly structured and lucid, not the jumbled confusion of a simply fading mind. Some patients even recalled accurate details from the period when their hearts had stopped. We still cannot prove what these experiences truly mean, But the pattern is consistent enough that scientists no longer dismiss it. And underneath all of it, something far more final is already moving through the brain. A single, unstoppable wave. Beneath the surges and the visions, there is a harder line, a true point of no return. Scientists have a clinical name for it. Terminal spreading depolarization. More bluntly, some of them call it the wave of death. To understand it, picture how a single neuron works. To stay alive and ready, every neuron pumps charged particles across its wall, holding a tiny voltage like a loaded spring. Keeping that spring loaded costs energy, constant energy. It is one of the most expensive things your body ever does. When oxygen finally runs out, the pumps fail. The spring releases. Charged particles flood across the membrane, and the neuron fully discharges. By itself, that is just one cell. But it does not stay one cell. The discharge of each neuron pushes its neighbors to discharge too. A slow wave of silence spreads across the brain, cell by cell, like a blackout rolling through a city, street after street, lights going out in sequence. Researchers have actually recorded this wave moving through human brain tissue at the moment circulation fails. It is, in a very literal sense, the brain switching itself off in a single sweep. But here is the crucial part. For a short time, this wave can still be reversed. If oxygen returns quickly enough, the pumps restart, the springs reload, and the neurons recover. This is exactly why fast, good CPR can save not just a life, but a mind. Yet if the wave completes and the silence holds too long, the damage hardens into something permanent. The window closes, which raises perhaps the strangest question of all. If the brain can still be pulled back, then when exactly does a person truly die? Among the strangest things survivors describe is the sense of leaving the body, floating up near the ceiling, looking calmly down at themselves and at the people working to save them. It feels like proof of a soul stepping out. But your brain has a very specific place where this feeling is built. It sits where two lobes meet, a region called the temporoparietal junction. Its job is to blend all of your senses into one steady answer to a simple question. Where am I? It takes your vision, your inner ear's sense of balance, and the felt map of your own body, and fuses them into a single point of view, anchored just behind your eyes. Neuroscientists have shown that when this one region is disturbed, that anchor slips. In a now famous case, gently stimulating this area with a mild electric current made a fully awake patient suddenly feel she was hovering above her own body. No dying required, just a glitch in a single junction. So when oxygen drops and this region misfires, the brain can lose track of where you end and the room begins. The felt center of you drifts loose and you seem to float free. It is not a spirit leaving the flesh. It is a map quietly losing its pin. And yet, knowing the mechanism does not make the experience any less powerful for the people who live through it. The brain is a master storyteller, and at the very edge it tells perhaps its most convincing story of all, which leaves us with the deepest mystery, not what the brain does as it dies, but how long the dying actually takes. We like to imagine death as a single instant, a line crossed, a switch flipped from on to off. But your body simply does not work that way. different tissues die at very different speeds. Your heart muscle, starved of oxygen, fails within minutes. But many of your other cells are tougher, and they fade far more slowly. The brain is the most urgent case of all. Without oxygen, its neurons begin to take serious damage in roughly 4 to 6 minutes, which is exactly why those first minutes after a cardiac arrest matter so desperately. And yet, even then, the cells are not instantly gone. In 2019, scientists at Yale showed just how blurry the line really is. They took the brains of pigs that had been dead for hours and pumped them with a specially designed fluid. Some basic cellular functions quietly flickered back. Individual cells responded again. This was not the conscious mind of the animal returning, but it proved that dead is not nearly as absolute as we once assumed. The shutdown can, in part, be paused. So when does a person actually die? Modern medicine increasingly gives the same answer. Death is a process, not a moment. The heart stops, then comes the surge, then the wave. Then, cell by cell, over minutes and longer, the machine that was you goes quiet. And somewhere inside that fading sequence, not at one clean instant, the person slips away. Where exactly that happens, we still cannot say for certain. The brain guards the moment of its own ending more closely than almost any other secret it keeps. So, what happens to your brain right before you die? Not a simple switching off. Instead, a starving organ stages one last, vivid performance, a surge of activity, a narrowing tunnel, a flood of memory, and a final wave rolling from neuron to neuron into silence. Much of it we can now explain. Some of it still sits just beyond our instruments, waiting for better tools. But here is the strangely comforting part. Whatever it is, your brain seems built to meet the end not with raw terror, but with one last burst of itself. And if a dying brain can replay an entire life in seconds, how does that same brain decide which memories to keep and which to quietly erase every single night while you sleep? That is a mystery for another video. This was Doodle Anatomy.